Hello my dear students, today we're going to talk about zero-order methods and how can we use them for finding solution of some non-convex problems, some very hard problems in terms of computational time, and for finding hyperparameters for machine learning models. When we're talking about zero-order methods, we assume that the only information that is available from the oracle is the function value in any given point. So it means that we have some point xk, then we ask oracle for the local information about this point, and the only information we have is the function value f. We do not have here any gradient information or Hessian or any other higher order derivatives or curvature or any other stuff. So we have to deal with this. And the typical case for such a setting is hyperparameter tuning or some what is called black box function. So like consider any machine learning model which is a Pac-Man that taking as input, for example, data or something related to data, and the other important input for machine learning model is actually the set of hyperparameters. For example, it can be a learning rate for gradient descent for training this model, learning rate for gradient descent. It can be a number of layers for neural network. It can be, for example, some bandwidth or type of kernel, for example. So the parameter or the hyperparameter could be not only a float number, but also some discrete variable as a kernel type, for example. It can be Gaussian kernel or like any other example. And at the output of this model, we have some metric which we are gonna maximize or minimize, depend on the metric. But let's say we have, I don't know, accuracy here. And actually, this is degree of freedom for our choice, right, for training this model, and our goal to maximize some metric with optimal choice of these parameters. For example, actually, like our goal is to train this model typically, but the training itself could only be done after we select the optimal hyperparameters here, which means that, for example, we can write down this optimization problem. We're going to maximize accuracy with respect to, for example, I don't know, number of layers or kernel type or number of trees in a random forest, and etc. What's interesting about this problem is that you cannot easily calculate a gradient of an accuracy with respect to kernel type, right? It's not possible. So the only information we have here is that we can try some number of layer or some kernel type, then perform machine learning model training and get an accuracy here as a result. Which means that this is a perfect case like for hyperparameter optimization, which is typically done with zero-order methods. And our talk will today contain three main parts. First, we're going to talk about some very basic ideas of zero-order methods, like very basic examples. On a synthetic function. Then we'll describe a little bit more advanced methods for global optimization. A little bit. They are not like super advanced, but a little bit more advanced than the first one. And then we'll go to demonstration of two libraries which are frequently used to optimal hyperparameter tuning for machine learning models. We're going to talk about Nevergrad library, which is developed by Facebook, and Apptuna, which is also quite good. So one more like very important announcement here, that when we are talking about zero-order methods, we are typically considering also one more important field of knowledge of optimization, which is called non-convex optimization, right? Because typically zero-order non-convex optimization or global optimization, these topics are typically going together, which means that imagine that we have some very bad function here, like, I don't know, this function, which is not convex function. And if you'll apply some like gradient method or Newton type method, you will for sure lose the global optimization idea here, which means that if you'll start somewhere here, you have a guarantee that you'll finish here with a gradient method, right? Because here you have this property at any local minima here. That's it. That's why these methods are typically like methods for solving global optimization problem, for finding minima of a non-convex function, and zero-order optimization are typically considered together. And now we'll start with some simple methods for global optimization, which are using zero-order information. Okay, now we're gonna open the notebook here on our site. I'll press here, and have a bunch of methods which we're gonna compare to each other actually and describe the main ideas. And we're gonna test them on a very bad function, probably the worst function you've ever seen for optimization. Yeah, that's it. Here we have such kind of function with a lot of local maxima and a lot of like very bad parts, sometimes even non-differentiable function. That's a good example for considering global optimization methods or zero order methods. So we'll start with a very simple idea, which is called random search, which is actually implies a uniform sampling over the budget set. Suppose here we're given a budget set which is from -10 to 10, and we're just sampling 40 randomly distributed, probably uniformly, but that's a question of selection. You can uniform in according to some another distribution here, and that's the result. We just sample and choose the best one. Here is a picture. We can see a lot of attempts here, and comparing the function values among each other. We just select the best solution here, and the actual solution, the true solution, the ground truth here is this highest peak, which is that's not like a randomly chosen idea. That was like artificially generated function with such a maximum. And here we have like an interesting question here: how many points do I need in order to reach this very narrow peak here? I have just increased my budget like almost 5 times, and like 4 to 5, and still I have something like a maximum of this wide maximum. But what if I'll increase it more? Still the best one is here. Again, okay, I've increased the budget 10 times already and still didn't reach the maximum. Oh, okay, and more. That's it. Somewhere here, like we have to sample about 600 with something times to get to the maximum, which is pretty bad actually. And that's the idea of working with global optimization methods. You actually never know which budget do you need to reach the maximum amount, right? To reach the optimum here. But that's pretty naive algorithm. Let's go to some more advanced ideas here. What if we'll apply some kind of selection here? So we'll just not randomly generating points, but we'll use some idea, some rule to generate them. And we'll go briefly through the simulated annealing idea, and we'll return to it later, which implies actually, take a look, let's take a look here. We're starting with some point, which is called parent here on the figure, and then we'll generate randomly near this point, probably according to Gaussian distribution centered with the parent. And if we'll have a better value of function, we can accept or reject this like candidate here. The interesting idea here, if we have a better choice, we accept the variant. But if I have a candidate with the lower function value, we still can accept this candidate with some probability. And this probability is going down through the experiment, which means that at the initial phase of the algorithm, you are like, you can escape local minima here, right? Because you can accept some candidates that are worse than the parent. But as soon as algorithm continue working, you can like overfit to your maxima here, and you can see that we do not accept candidates with lower function value at the end, right? Here you can see that like they tried, but we formulated it as follows. Here we have the Python implementation of the algorithm. We firstly like formulate a hypothesis here, which is called a candidate here. And then we sample a function value in this proposed candidate. Then, if the candidate could be accepted with some probability, right? And this probability is defined by the hyperparameter value, which is called temperature, because the origin of the algorithm is going from some physics, and this parameter temperature actually increasing, which decrease the probability of accepting worse candidate here. We'll return to the algorithm a little bit later with some more examples. Here, let's go to the next variant, which is called hill climbing, which is more which is a pretty simple idea. And yeah, we can see the dynamics here. We have initial value of like a candidate here, and just randomly generating the bunch of candidates here. And we select the best one among our candidates, and on the next iteration generate new population of solutions near the parent, like near the new candidate, and repeat the procedure until converge. Okay, let's take a look, a closer look here. For example, here we've generated these red candidates, and on the next iteration we'll select this point as a new parent. Let's verify it. Yes, that's it. On the new on the next iteration we'll select this point. That's it, and generate random values nearby. And here we have this reaching, which will be new parent here, right? That's it. So that's a hill climbing. But the bad idea about hill climbing here is that it could overfit to some local minima, which is a problem for all algorithms actually. But we can imply and we can add some heuristics to deal with this problem, which is called evolutionary strategy with m threads and n samples per thread. We'll consider it here. So we'll just generate, firstly we generate not one parent, but let's say 10 parents, and each parent forms its own thread here, and after that we sample near each of the parent here. So we have like 10 parents here and 10 samples per thread, which means that totally you have 100 samples per iteration here. And if you'll sample initially uniformly among very big domain here, you have a better chance of not overfitting here. But on the next iteration, you have to choose 10 best values among all the population of the solutions here, which means actually that we'll still receive this problem of overfitting to some single local minima. To deal with this problem, which is actually the first problem, we can introduce spices here, which means that not like we will perform the selection not among the whole population, but only among the species. So we'll derive a species, a subset of solutions which we can compare to each other, but only between among one species here, sorry. And yes, that's it. Let's try, let's run it here. Okay, we'll have the animation here. Let's take a look. Firstly, as in the previous method, we generate some number of parents, let's say, I don't know, 5 parents, or in our case, it's 4 parents. Okay, let's verify it. Yeah, here, but we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parents. Okay, we have 5 parents, and we generate some amount of solutions, of candidates, and each parent define its own species, which means that the children of this parent could only interact and compare among each other. And what is interesting here, that we distribute some fixed amount of children, which we're gonna to sample on the next iteration, between the species. And if some species, like if the children from some species and the procedure here is the following. We like sum or average the function value among all children in the species and compare this value among all species that we have. And next, we derive a probabilities for like sampling the amount of children which we're gonna distribute for the species. And here we can see it as the fit number here, and this fit number means, let's take a look, just the average value of a function. Here we have this, let's take a look, it should be fit here, species J, and this species J is just the mean value of function values. And here, the more fit value here, the higher the fit value here, the more children you'll have at the next iteration. You can see it here, like minus 0.10. Here we have the maximum amount of children here. And again, and you'll generate it again. And you can see here that this idea of species allows you to fit some single local minimum or local maximum, to be more robust to some like selection of single local maximum here. You can see that like we've spent already about 30 iterations, and only here we'll overfit to a single local maximum here, because on all previous iterations we have some solutions and some children's somewhere in another local maximum here. That's interesting. And we have to move to the next method here, which is called evolutionary sampling with fixed variance, which implies following idea that we initially sample randomly some amount of candidates here, then we like measure a function value at each of them, and then we'll calculate a variance of the next sampling. So we, like initially we have this green line indicates a sampling distribution, and next we like measure a weighted mean value of the distribution which we're going to sample the next iteration, which means that again the higher value we have at the point, the higher weight we use in weighted mean here, which means the following idea here. We have these like moving sampling distributions with fixed variance. Very easy question here is, why do we have to fix the variance? And actually we don't have to fix the variance. That's why we have this covariance matrix adaptation evolutionary sampling, which is pretty the same, but the width of the sampling distribution or the variance could also be fitted using weighted averaging here. You can see that, like again, the more the function value we have, the higher the function value we have, the more interest this specific point attracts. Like, okay, that's it. And take a look at the idea that I've just like showed you some simple algorithms of dealing with non-convex, probably non-differentiable function with a lot of local maximas or local minima. And I didn't mention anything about theoretical guarantees of convergence. And actually, you can understand that in these cases, like that's not the case of theoretical guarantees and some strong results here. Very few results can be stated about such problems, and for very specific algorithms, for very specific non-convexities and etc. That's why the typical idea of choosing the algorithm to use is to run as much algorithms as you can, and as many algorithms as you can, and just compare them and select the best one. That's it. Next, we're gonna switch to idea of simulated annealing algorithm and some more advanced topics here. Okay, let's discuss the idea of simulated annealing. Now we're gonna consider some optimization problem, and again, it doesn't matter for us minimization or maximization actually. And the algorithm could be formulated as follows. On the first step, we're gonna select the initial hyperparameter, which is called temperature here. So we just like fix this hyperparameter, let's say, I don't know, 100, it doesn't matter. Next step, we'll select some random point in our space. And again, what does it mean? It means that suppose we have this like function. That's our f from x, or it can be treating as energy because, as I said before, this method came from physics, and like minimization, energy minimization is one of the core concepts in like the whole life actually. And at some point we select some random point here, let's say, I don't know, this xk. And we have the function value f from xk. At each iteration, we decrease the temperature a little bit, which means that this alpha should be less than 1 here, and that's like exponential actually decreasing, and generate next point somehow, probably randomly near your current candidate here. Let's say we have x k plus 1 here. And here we can clearly see that f from x k plus 1 is less than the previous one, which is good for us, which is good. And we accept new point. So if this we accept, which means that we measure this difference in energy value or function value, doesn't matter again. Here you can treat E as f from x. And if we decrease the function value here, then okay, we accept the new step. But if the function value is increasing, which means that imagine that the next point xk plus 2 would be this xk plus 2. And function value at this point is higher than the previous one, but the solution itself is closer to the global optimum, right? We accept this new point with some probability, and this probability is changing during the algorithm because it's defined by the temperature hyperparameter here. So again, here we can see a nice GIF from Wikipedia. Oops. Okay, we can. Yeah, like that's how it works for function maximization here. And take a look at the temperature hyperparameter here. It, like, firstly, at the initial phase of the algorithm, it can accept bad function values, like here, which are lower than the previous one. But as soon as procedure goes further, we can no longer accept bad values of function. And due to this idea, we initially can escape some bad local maximums here. But at the end of the procedure, we'll finish at some of them. That's it. Okay. And actually, this idea could be applied to a very wide range of problems here. Here is one of them, which is called n queens puzzle. And the idea is to place n queens on a chess plate n times n, and these queens should not beat each other, which means that, for example, here we have this queen can beat this direction, and this direction, right? This queen can beat this. Oh, sorry, it's gone. And etc. So this is it, and all other directions as well. And actually, the problem is pretty hard because it's like one of the example of discrete optimization, and we already know that discrete optimization is typically a very hard problem. And actually we can formulate this problem as an optimization problem and try to solve it with simulated annealing algorithm. And here we can see the results here, like for some specific choice of n, the energy, and energy here is the number of intersections of queens. And by intersections, I mean that some queen can beat another queen. And when we reach exact zero, we'll have a solution for the problem. And here is the number of steps which is needed to find a solution, which is dependence on the dimension of the problem, which means that it's clearly seen that something linear here, right? But that's not the general proof here, nothing like that. That means that it just works well for some small amount of problem, but actually amount of 4t, it's not really small for such a complex problem here. You can open the code for these plots in Colab here. Let's also discuss one more important idea here, which is called genetic algorithm. And the idea came from biology and was inspired by the nature. Again, we're solving some optimization problem or maximization again. And suppose we have n points in Euclidean space here, and in this salesman problem, traveling salesman problem, our goal is to find the shortest path of going through all of the points here. And this task is non-trivial. It's again a problem of discrete optimization, which are typically exponentially hard, NP hard even. And this problem is also NP hard problem. And it can be solved via genetic algorithm, which is an example of zero-order method in a reasonable time. Or, I mean, not like exactly solved, but typically you can find an approximate solution in a reasonable time here. Let's take a look how can we formulate a genetic algorithm here. Firstly, we need to formulate an objective function. And objective function here is quite simple. That's just the sum of lengths of all line segments in a solution here, right? Something like this, I don't know. That's probably not optimal, but probably pretty close to the optimal one. And so great, we have a criterion here, right? An objective function. We cannot calculate the gradient of this function with respect to the order of our path. And how can we formulate an approach to deal with the problem? We can initially generate a random solution for the problem, which will not be optimal one, but still will be a solution. And again, we have n houses here, and suppose all of them are numerated here, like first, second, third, fourth, I don't know, fifth, and like n. That's it. It means that any array of n unique integer numbers is a solution for our problem. I mean, not optimal solution, but some solution some path. So again, let's say vector 2, 3, 7, 1, 606, tralala, n is a path. So just like the order of our path. And for each this vector of integers, I can directly calculate a criterion, an objective function. Moreover, I can initially generate a bunch of initial guesses, of initial solutions, and each of the solutions will be called an individual. And they are in common, will be called a population. Individual and population. And that's the first stage of the algorithm here. Next, we'll define some crossing procedure, which means that that's some kind of procedure which takes two solutions as an input and produce some third solution which should inherit properties of its parents. That's how crossing works, right? For example, suppose we have 10 houses here, and like that's the parent 1, that's the parent 2. One of the way to define this procedure is called ordered crossover, and here how it works. We initially take some amount of numbers with the first parent and directly copy them to the children. Sounds reasonable. Next, we cross these numbers of which were chosen on the first stage here. Let's say like 3 here, 3, 6, 6, 2, 2, 5, 5, 1, 1. That's it. And all numbers that are left here will go to the child, and they'll go in an order which are in the second parent here. So here goes 7, here goes 8, here goes 9. That's how we get the child given two parent vectors. And actually, like the child inherits some kind of properties of first and the second parent here. And that's not the only way to define a crossing procedure, and that's also a hyperparameter in the algorithm. Here you can choose another way, and the algorithm will work like another way. Also, we define a mutation procedure, which is needed to escape local maxima, local minimas here. And the mutation takes some parent or like some vector as an input and produce a vector which is similar to the input vector but slightly different. For example, we can just swap some positions here. Let's say we have like this vector and we just swap some two numbers with a low probability, say 0.05, right? We just switch 3 and 8. We randomly select this. That's a mutation. And mutation allows us to escape local minimums. And the next stage, probably the most important stage here, is the selection stage. What does it mean? Suppose initially we have like a population of 100 individuals here, which means that we have 100 solutions. Okay, let's say no, solutions. Next, we perform crossing procedure and we'll have like 50 children. And also we have 15 mutants here. And they together forms a new population of size 200 solutions, which means that we have 200 objective function values here. And we select 100 of them, which are the best. So which means that we just select top n of them. And here we can go here to the example and take a look at how it works. Yeah, that's it. And here we have like initial problem and a lot of evolution. And you can see that any random solution is a pretty bad one. And during the evolution, it will find like some better ideas with fewer amount of intersections. And actually it can be found, the animation can be found on our site. Sorry. For example, traveling salesman problem here. And that's the animation of how the best solution is going through the iterations. And here you can see how path length is evolutioning during the generations. That's it. That's how it works. And also it is interesting to discuss some basic ideas of Nevergrad algorithm, which is quite frequently used for zero-order optimization. Imagine that you do not know any calculus or even basic algebra ideas. Your goal is to find a minimum of some function using only function values. The simplest idea here is just sample 2 points which are close to each other and go to the direction of the smallest one. The problem with such an approach is that if you'll go with a fixed step, you'll never reach an optimum here and will oscillate near optimal solution, which means that you'll step here, 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 and then you'll go something like this. The obvious solution to this problem is to modify your steps in order to accelerate your convergence, which means that if you understand that you decrease a function value, you can go longer with longer steps here. You can like expand your rate. If you understand that at some point you increase the function value, you have to slow down and decrease your step size. And that's actually the idea of Nevergrad algorithm here. Again, you have some contraction rate and expansion rate. Expansion rate stands for how long you'll like increase your step if you understand that the function value decreasing. And contraction rate at the same time stands for the contraction. It's pretty obvious here. And you can see that using this idea, you can converge to an optimal solution. And what is more interesting, you can even converge with this idea, like in such a strange case. Imagine that you run some gradient algorithm here. Actually, you'll never solve your problem with the gradient methods here because almost everywhere, like the gradient is either 0 or doesn't exist here. That's the problem. But Nevergrad idea will solve your problem with this quite simple idea of expansion and contraction, right? And you can see that, like, if you set expansion a little bit lower, you'll go more like precisely, right, accurately, but slower than you can be. Okay. That's it. The method could be easily generalized to a higher dimensions if we'll use one additional point here and form, which is called Nevergrad simplex here. We have 3 points which are moving and like flipping sometimes. If you understand that you are not increasing the function value, you just flip this triangle here. Like, and in n-dimensional space, you'll have to use n+1 points here, which will form another mid simplex here. And for example, for this function, you have this triangle, which will flipping to an optimal solution. And Nevergrad is quite a good heuristics, which works pretty well on small dimensions here. Let's say 2, 3, 4, because it's pretty easy to determine the direction of minimization, which is not true for the case of huge amount of variables, for the huge scale optimization. That's why in huge scale optimization, we typically do not use these methods like Nevergrad, like random search, like simulated annealing. That's actually pretty naive here. And the whole idea of Nevergrad algorithm is just performing reflections, contractions, this flipping, according to the function value in these 3 points. That's it. To be like make a deeper understanding of the algorithm, I'll refer you to the page here, methods, zero order methods, and Nevergrad algorithm. That's the detailed description here. How you'll order the points, how you'll calculate reflection, the expansion, contraction, and etc. Here you can see how it works in a non-convex setting here. Okay, it converges, and it's interesting that this algorithm could be easily modified to use in constraint optimization, to use in constraint case. That's one of the illustration. That's it for the Nevergrad algorithm for today, and we're gonna finally switch to applications and how to choose optimal hyperparameters for machine learning model. And we'll go here. Now we'll demonstrate 2 libraries here. First, we'll start with the Nevergrad library from Facebook, and that's pretty good library for PyTorch optimization, PyTorch model optimization. And one of the main advantage of this library is the huge amount of optimizers that are already implemented here, and you can use any of them. And I can just scroll it like CM and CMA, that's probably covariance matrix adaptation that we already heard about. A lot of other algorithms, Cauchy, chain meta, Powell, a lot of them. Kabila algorithm, differential evolution algorithm. Probably that should be in Nevergrad somewhere. Evolutionary strategy algorithm, genetic algorithm. Let's try to find Nevergrad. Not directly, not really, because Oh no, yeah, we have Nelder meat. Cool. And a lot of them. And we'll just demonstrate how these algorithms could be used for finding a minimum of such a bad function, which is called Rastriggin function. And this function is a function on the plane. And here we have the comparison of some algorithms. Here we have just like implementation of Nelder-Mead algorithm and 1+1 algorithm. Okay, and how do we use them? We just import them from the library, setting the budget, which is the maximum amount of iteration that we're gonna spend here, and just call minimize method here on our function. Okay, that's it. Rastriggin here is a simple function, like simple numpy function here, and it can be optimized with the Nevergrad library here. That's just a like example of how can we use it. And actually, if you'll go to the official repository of the Nevergrad, it's pretty active one. Let's go for the Nevergrad GitHub. Yeah, you can see this crossed sign of a gradient, which is cool. And the last commit was yesterday. And actually, you can use the library for a lot of other things, like here you can see this Nevergrad optimization for machine learning, and we know that PyTorch was designed by Facebook also, and that's why this library could be used for PyTorch optimization as well. And like here is a huge amount of documentation. Now it's documented much better than it was like a year ago. And here is it. Now we'll go to the next library, which is called Apptuna, and which is also quite good library, which can plot very nice pictures of optimization, and we'll show you how to use this function, this library, to optimize some simple machine learning model here. Okay, we just install it. Okay. We're gonna use Iris dataset, which is probably the simplest dataset in machine learning, and we'll use random forest classifier here with some number of estimators, number of trees, and the maximum depth of the tree in it. And these are hyperparameters here. Okay, we can import it. Okay, cool. Can use this, and if we'll use this number of estimators and maximum depth here, these values, we can calculate cross-validation score for our specific data set and our specific model. And our accuracy on cross-validation stands for 0.95. Great. Let's optimize some hyperparameters here. We'll use Apptuna for it, and in Apptuna you are to use trial object as an input, and you are to formulate objective function which takes trial as an input and return some scalar which should be maximized or minimized. You'll setting it up later. And again, we're loading this data set. We set the number of estimators here as integer parameter here. you can specify the form here. It should be integer. And you specify the range. Here we're just playing a little bit. We say that the maximum depth should be float, but that's not the true for like these artificial trees, right? That's why we'll have int here, right? Here we have also bounds, like the depth should be from 1 to 32. And next we have this classifier, which performs on selected hyperparameters here. And we'll initialize study. And in our study, we optimize our objective function. And here we have the budget, which means that we have only 100 of trials here, 100 of different values of our parameters here. Let's start it. Okay, we have these trials. And let's take a look how it works. We have better accuracy. Previously we had 0.95. Now we have better, significantly better probably. Even we have number of estimators equals to 20 and maximum depth equals to 1 actually, right, in practice. And we can even perform conditional like computation of cost function here. We can say that the classifier itself is a variable. It could be a random forest or SVC classifier, which is a SVM with some kernel here. And if classifier is equal to random forest, then we'll use these hyperparameters. If classifier is SVC, that's cool. We'll use it with this hyperparameter here. And we can again run our study and take a look. Can we do better than it was? Yeah, we can do better with another classifier here. That's interesting. But what's most exciting for me in Apptuna library is you can build a very, very nice visualization here. Let's take a look of some of them. That's the evolution of the best value among the trials here. That's the 100 trials. And you can see that like you have this evolution here. That's pretty interesting. And some more nice visualizations here. You can see the distributions of objective functions due to some input parameters here. You can see that like the SVM classifier is located a little bit like higher than, but probably it's not obvious from the picture, but sometimes it could be obvious, and you can like you can mine some non-trivial ideas from such a graphs, right? And what is like the most interesting graph for me is this counterplot, which means that it's extrapolation of how your loss function surveys looks like in this plane slice. You have this maximum depth parameter and number of estimators parameters, and that's the approximation of your surface of your objective function. That's pretty interesting, and you can see that we have this value of like low objective function value and this plateau of higher objective function value. Yes, that's it. And actually your homework will be to use the Apptuna library with Keras library to select the best hyperparameter in some specific machine learning task. That was it. To sum it up, we have a lot of like different methods to apply in non-convex optimization or global optimization or zero order optimization, right? And that's like there is no easy answer to the question which specific method should I choose. You don't have any cool theoretic guarantees here usually, and you have to perform as many, you have to run as many methods as you can and select the best one. That's it. A lot of heuristics, a lot of like magics and hand manipulations, but they are interesting. That's it. Bye.